Timing is one of the most important factors to consider for sunset photography, and it's one of the most common mistakes I see other photographers do. First of all, I see people arrive far too late for the beginning of the sunrise. They don't have enough time to find the perfect location, scatter around that area that they've chosen, and most photographers tend to leave too early too. When I'm shooting a sunset, I tend to give myself between about 90 minutes and an hour to find a perfect location, get set up, find out where the sun's going to set, and get my composition just right. And then after the sun has set, and this is where you typically see people go home, sun's gone past the horizon, okay, the sun's set now, time to go home. That is possibly the worst thing you can do, because about 10, 15, 20 minutes after the sun has gone beneath the horizon is when you start to see the clouds glow in different colors. And this is the best part of the sunset. Always stick around for at least 40 minutes after the sun has set to get the best possible photos. So many people pack up and leave, and as they're driving home, they see in their rearview mirror a beautiful pink sky and they think, I've got to get back there and start shooting again. And it's too late. You have maybe 5 minutes of colorful clouds, so don't leave until you know that they're either not going to come or they've been and gone. The one thing every good sunset photograph needs is clouds. This might seem a little bit unusual because if you have too many clouds in the sky, you can't actually see any of the detail that you'd like to see. However, we're not shooting with total cloud coverage here. We're looking for scattered clouds. Thin clouds, wispy clouds, and scattered clouds like you see on the mountain in the background here. This has got some really nice depth to it and adds for texture and color. And when the sun does set and it goes beyond the horizon, so long as there isn't too many clouds blocking out the sun, which there may actually be today, you're going to get some real interesting colors and glows to your sunsets because the clouds are going to light up in this orange and pink color. When you're location scouting for landscape photography, it's important that you also take into account where the sun is going to be in the sky. As we know, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, but it's hard to know exactly where the sun is going to set when you're looking at the sky at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So for that, I like to use an app called PhotoPills. It has augmented reality of the sun, and it will tell me where the sun is, which is obviously something I don't need help with, but more importantly, where the sun is going to be and where it's going to set. So if at 2 p.m. the sun was over here in the sky and I want to know exactly where the sun's going to set so I can get a sense of how the light is going to shine across my scene, I can use this app and see, okay, well, I know the sun's going to set over there. It should give me enough light on that mountain over there to give me some warm evening sun. So PhotoPills is an app that I use to do my planning because it allows me to know exactly where the sun is going to set. The gear that I'm using for sunset photography is fairly simple. I'm using a sturdy tripod, very good quality Manfrotto one here. My camera is set with a 100mm lens at the moment. That's because I'm trying to zoom in on the background over here to capture the clouds that are wisping around this lit peak. And I'm also, as you'll notice, using an intervalometer. The reason for the intervalometer is it allows me to remotely fire the photos without having to shake the camera, which could cause a little bit of motion blur. And I'm also setting it to take a photo every 10 seconds. The reason for this is because the light and clouds are going to move so quickly the closer it gets to sunset. You want to consistently take photographs when you have your composition set up right. Some people may consider this cheating. I personally don't. I'm trying to film a video and I'm also trying to shoot at the same time. So I am using an intervalometer. If I'm not busy trying to do more than one thing, if I'm only shooting with one camera, I probably won't use the intervalometer. I'll just fire it off. But it does help if you are using more than one camera because, for example, there's clouds over there and I might want to set up a second tripod over there to take photos of those clouds too. And so that's why I sometimes use an intervalometer too. The gear itself is not that important. You'll notice that I'm not trying to use any special filters like polarizing, ND or graduated because they're really not that important for sunset photography. You might want to use a polarizing filter some days, but on most days your camera will be fine without one. The settings that I use for sunset photography are pretty much standard across most landscape photography. I'm shooting aperture priority mode here. My aperture is set to f8 for great sharpness and good depth of field. The ISO is set to 100 for improved image quality. And the shutter speed is going to be worked out by the camera depending on the exposure compensation that I've set. Now I'm using 1 1/3 stop underexpose in this scene, and that's because I really want to make sure I don't lose any of the whites in this cloud. And by underexposing a little bit, I'm going to ensure that I keep those details. We'll talk about histogram soon, but the histogram is really helpful for finding this information. I'm also using regular settings like auto white balance because I'm shooting in RAW and I can correct it later if I'd like. And I'm using evaluative or matrix metering mode here because it doesn't really matter what the metering does in my camera. I've kind of taken total manual control over here by adjusting the exposure and compensation meter and setting it to aperture priority mode. Finally, I will say that I am using manual focus. Manual focus allows me to select a part of the scene about a third of the way in, focus manually. My camera's on a tripod, so I know the composition isn't going to change. I don't need to worry about the focus changing, and it means that every time I take a photo, as soon as I press that button, it's going to take the photo and it's not going to try and refocus each time. It's not going to zoom in and out trying to find focus. It's just set, and that makes for a much better experience because you don't have that frustration from a lack of focus. The histogram in your camera is very useful when it comes to getting the correct exposure at sunset photography. The reason it's so important is because we're going to have a lot of highlights in the clouds and a lot of shadows in the foreground that's in the shade. We need to make sure that the photos we capture are neither overexposed and clipping with white or underexposed and clipping with black. So the histogram works like this. It's a bar chart. There are 256 columns. Column 0 is total blackness and column 255 is total white. If there are any pixels in these columns, that means you've lost information. You've lost the information because it's underexposed or overexposed. By using the histogram, you're able to see if your image is correctly exposed, and that's going to make your editing process a lot easier later. I find that if I technically underexpose my image when I'm shooting sunsets, I can recover more information later because there's not going to be as much detail lost in the highlights with the sun and the clouds. You can also use the histogram in live view mode on most cameras. I'll show you what that looks like here. If I turn on my camera and I press the info button 3 times, my histogram will show me if I'm over or underexposing the image, and I can adjust the exposure accordingly. So you can see how this moves as I scroll through the exposure settings. So that's now 1 stop overexposed, and you can see we're clipping a little bit, and this is going to be 2 stops underexposed, and we've lost information there too. It's all about finding that right balance. I think 1 stop underexposed here will help me to save my highlights while still keeping the detail in the shadows. Once you have your location found, your tripod and camera set up, your exposures set, well, then it's time to do the most important part of the photography process, and that is composition. The one thing that I think is probably the most important thing to remember about sunset photography is the horizon placement. So we're looking out at this scene here, and we have beautiful mountain range. We have depth and trees and a path leading in, and we also have a couple of little buildings down here. That is way more interesting than the sky. The sky has a little slither of cloud line at the top and then just bright blue skies. The bright blue sky is personally doing nothing for this photograph. If I crop this photo so we just had the top of the mountain range at the bottom of the frame and then a bright blue sky, it would be a really bad sunset photograph, which is why horizon placement is so fundamentally important. You need to take a look at your scene, ask yourself, what is the most interesting and important part of this frame, and then compose the image accordingly. If the foreground and the trees and the background and the mountains and the clouds that are just hovering over the top here are the most important part of the frame, then they should take up the majority of the frame. The horizon placement should be very high. Now, if, for example, we had just a mountain range off in the distance, but a wealth of incredibly pink, bright clouds that are scattered around, and we had wispy ones and we had little floaty ones, well, that would be a lot more interesting than the mountain range, which would probably just be more like a silhouette than anything else. So in that case, we'd want to adjust the composition so that the horizon placement was right at the bottom of the scene. In this situation, we want a high horizon placement though. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and check out the links below. I have an entire course on landscape photography called Simply Stunning Landscapes. It's everything you could ever want to know to get started taking stunning landscape photographs. If you did enjoy the video, I would also ask that you consider subscribing. We're releasing new videos every week on a Monday at 12 PM London time, so you can get your fix of photography every single week. Thanks for watching, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.